Hello and welcome to another edition of Profiles and Issues, the Westchester Cable Television talk show that gives you in-depth interviews with prominent people in the news. I'm your host, Dennis Rudin. Join us each month on Cablevision, Channel 75, Verizon Fios, Channel 34, or on your computer or iPhone on YouTube.com and www.greenbergny.com. Go to the left-hand green side of the website page and press Public Access TV on demand. Our profile and guest for this program is Assemblyman Tom Abinanti. Tom has lived in Westchester since 1975 in Greenberg and is a practicing attorney. He has taught continuing legal education courses for Pace Law School as well as state and local government courses as an adjunct professor at Mercy College. Mr. Abinanti first ran for office in 1980 and served 2 terms as a Greenberg town councilman. In 1992, he was elected to the Westchester County Board of Legislators, where he served for 18 years and as Democratic Majority Leader for 15 years of that time. The 92nd District, which Abinanti represents, includes the towns of Greenberg, Mount Pleasant, the villages of Ardsley, Elmsford, Dobbs Ferry, Hastings-on-the-Hudson, Irvington, Tarrytown, Sleepy Hollow, and parts of Briarcliff and Yonkers. We are proud and honored to welcome Assemblyman Tom Abinanti as our guest on Profiles and Issues. Tom, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Great. Okay, Tom, you have devoted a lot of time and effort to trying to upgrade the service on Metro North and the safety procedures. First, let's start on the topic of railroad crossing safety.
Let's start with the lifeline of our community is Metro North.
Okay.
That's why we're here. The railroad brought people from New York City up to the suburbs, and people got their jobs in the city. We have since developed into a sophisticated suburban community, but we're dependent in large measure on what's happening in New York City. So it's very important that we have an efficient and cost-effective system. Right now, it's not. The on-time rate is terrible. They've made it very expensive so that a lot of people can't even afford to take Metro North into the city.
Yes,
if you take a look, you'll see that the commuter time is now halfway through the day. So off-peak is a very small window, which makes it much more expensive for people. So I think we have to devote more time and attention to improving Metro North and in the entire MTA. And this is a state responsibility. I mean, this is a state agency. So we need to do more. I've spent a lot of time prodding and pushing. The Assembly has promoted various different proposals, none of which have been adopted. But we've tried very hard to improve the system for the people who live in New York City and those who live around New York City.
There are 3 areas. One is railroad crossing safety. Have you made recommendations? Have they complied, or
yeah,
not?
Unfortunately, if you recall, several years ago there was a major accident where some people were killed at a railroad station just north of Valhalla, on Commerce Street. That's in my district, and I took the results of that very seriously. I pushed for the Department of Transportation to do a safety study of all railroad crossings, on-grade crossings throughout the state. We didn't get anywhere with that, so we passed legislation. And we campaigned for it, and the governor signed that legislation. It's now 2 years beyond the deadline that DOT was supposed to give us a report. We still have seen nothing. We've spoken to them. We've asked for their input as to what's going on. No response. I think it's unreasonable now for them to not come back and say, we're going to do it or we're not going to do it, and here's what you have to do to get it done, or whatever. If they need more money in the budget, they haven't asked for it. I think that it's well past the time that we should have these reports, because we need to have a viewpoint of the railroad crossings from the driver's point of view, not from the railroad's point of view, from the driver's point of view. I'm not going to get into all of the details, but I've met with the woman's husband, the woman who was killed in the SUV that was on the railroad tracks and got hit by the train. He's made himself into an expert on this subject. And when you listen to him, it's fascinating when he talks about all of the things that could be done to make our rail crossings safer. And we need to have DOT's input and have them respond to some of the things that he's talking about. And if we need upgrades, then we have to do the upgrades.
How do you battle bureaucratic agencies like that?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. When it's a big issue, we often get help from the Speaker of the Assembly or the committee chairs. But it's very difficult if you have a non-responsive agency. I mean, here the governor said, yes, we should do these studies. He signed the legislation. And it was an instruction to the agency to do this. And if the governor is not going to get the agency to do it, then we've got to raise that issue during campaign times. And that's what we do. We talk about it. We've had several press conferences on the issue. We've brought out the husband of the woman who died several times. We've gotten headlines in newspapers and on radio and TV stations. And still we can't get a response from them. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why he has a primary challenger. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Explain to our viewers what positive train control is.
Well, in very simple layman's terms, it's a device that is put on the train and on the tracks that monitors how fast the train is going, entering into a particular location, a hazardous location. Let's say a sharp curve or something like that, and it would automatically reduce the speed of the train if the train is not slowing down by itself. That's in simple terms what it does. It's an automatic device. It's highly, it's a high-tech technology, but it's proven around the country to save lives. And Metro-North was supposed to be doing that, and there's been some discussion lately that they're not going to make the deadline, which is coming up pretty soon. I know one of our United States senators has been pressing them to
is that Chuck Schumer?
Yes, Chuck Schumer has been out there, and he's been pressing them to say, you can't back away. You've got to make this deadline. There are lives at stake here, and so I'm hopeful that they're going to do it, and within the time period that they're supposed to.
Is that to override a safety procedure so that if the person who drives the train
fails for whatever reason?
Yeah,
yes, that's right. So it would be automatic. It would slow the train down. It's almost like a control on the throttle, I guess. It would not let the train go beyond a certain speed as it's entering into these particular locations.
Now, this has been happening for years, and I'm not, is there anything they can do to make the railroad operate more efficiently with regard to running on time?
Well, I think first of all they've got to get modern. They've got to keep their equipment modern. I think they have to also figure out how to put people on and off the trains better. And lastly, I mean, these are just common sense things. And lastly, they may need longer trains. I mean, if you've seen, they've tried to lengthen some of our platforms so they can have longer trains. I think also that they have to. I think they also have to extend the hours. I know that sounds somewhat strange, but if you take a look, you will see that Metro-North closes down just a little before midnight, or I think it's 1 o'clock is the last train, and doesn't open up again until just a little before 6 a.m. There are people who would like to use Metro-North all around the clock. I mean, there are a lot of young people who go to the city and have to drive because they can't get back by Metro-North. But I've also heard from business people. I had one contractor who says, look, I've got to be at work in the city at 6 a.m. There's no train that I can take to get me there by 6 a.m. I have to drive. I've got to set it. So I think you've got to stretch it out longer. I also believe that there's some technology that they can use so that they can run more trains in more times so that there's not as much of a delay. There are some devices that I know they use in Europe. I had a chance to talk to a manufacturer of the technology that they're using on driverless cars. And there's a possibility there that if you adapt that type of technology to the trains, you will not be as dependent on the signaling system, which seems to be old-fashioned and needs an upgrade. So I'm hopeful that the technology will solve this problem, but Metro North has to have the will to go out and get that and then press for the funding that's necessary to put these types of improvements in place.
Sure. I would also bring to the attention of our viewers, although you probably see it, as I'm conducting the interview, the Assemblyman's email is being flashed on the screen, as well as my email. So if you want to reach out, we'll see if we can squeeze in your office telephone, too. But definitely the email will be there.
Yes.
Okay, just one other question, then we have to move on, but this is important. People have complained about this, of the way the mass transit system operates, and some have suggested the restructuring of the system, namely, should we take total control away from the governor, as it now is?
Look, that raises a much bigger issue. I believe that the governor in New York is constitutionally too strong. And we have a governor now who's taken advantage of those constitutional provisions and made himself even stronger. I believe that there's too much power in the hands of the governor of the state of New York, and that more of that power should be returned to the legislature, because we're on the street every day. We hear the complaints from people. We see what the problems are. And when we get into budget negotiations, for example, the governor's got the total upper hand. So he lays out the framework of what the budget is, and then if we want to make a change to it, he can say, I'm going to veto it. He's got an item veto, so that he can veto any item that we add to the budget. And there was an unfortunate lawsuit decision when Sheldon Silver was the Speaker of the Assembly. He just got fed up with dealing with Governor Pataki, who was playing the same kind of role that Governor Cuomo was playing. Not as strong as Governor Cuomo, but the same approach of, you take it or leave it. And so he brought a lawsuit. And unfortunately, the court said, look, you cannot affect the budget to the extent that you'd like to affect it. If you don't like it, don't vote for it. And that's why we had year after year after year of no budgets. If you remember, there was a period of time during Pataki, and what happened was the legislature was saying, okay, the courts told us we can't change it, so we're not going to pass one. And then along came Governor Patterson, who said, instead of giving you an extender, I'm not going to give you an extender. You vote for my budget or you don't vote for anything. And the legislature decided that there were too many people who would be hurt if we voted for nothing. So we negotiate and we negotiate, but the governor really has the upper hand. And that's not right. Secondly, you've got all of these agencies that aren't even in the budget. The MTA is not part of our budget. There's only a little piece of money in there that goes to the MTA. The Thruway Authority is not. All of the state authorities are not in the budget, so we don't have any control over them. And the governors use, I say governors, not just this governor, but other governors as well. This one's brought it, is superb at it, but it's shifting things to these agencies so it's out of the control of the legislature. And so we can't even supervise what it is they're doing.
All right, okay. We have to move on, but just to quickly note, he also left several state Senate seats vacant during the budgeting process.
Yes, that's true. Yes,
so yeah,
that's true.
All right. Now you've also done a lot on promoting parkway safety. You want to go into that?
Yeah, this is another issue where we're dealing with an obstinate agency. When I was a county legislator, maybe 15 years ago now, I saw accidents on the Bronx River Parkway, and I said, why can't we, as a county, take care of our own parkway and find ways to prevent trucks from going onto the parkways, wrong-way drivers from going on the parkways? And I came up with the idea that I notice now that Boston uses, which is to put a barrier across either the entranceway or somewhere in the middle of the parkway, so that as a truck approaches, they will see this barrier and they will get off the exit ramp. And I've been pushing that, and I was told that we couldn't do this. Well, upon research, I realized that we could do it. When I became an assemblyman, I started to press DOT to do this. They would not do it, so I passed a piece of legislation that requires the state DOT to survey the entrances, find out where the trucks are getting on, these oversized trucks, where they're not supposed to be getting on the Bronx River, the Sawmill, the Hutch, and then put up some barriers if necessary, height barriers. The governor vetoed the bill. Within 72 hours after the governor vetoed the bill, saying DOT is doing enough, another truck hit another bridge. And if you take a look, you'll see I don't understand how the King Street Bridge is still standing on the Hutchinson River Parkway. It's been hit, I think, 20 times this year by trucks. And don't think that trucks have been on the parkways only 20 times. The numbers show that we have trucks on our parkways about 1,000 times a year. So that's like 3 times a day somewhere in the county, illegally on our parkways. They hit bridges somewhere about 20 to 30 times a year. This year, the numbers show that already we've had 40 bridge strikes, and we're not even through the year yet.
Don't they read the signs?
Truck drivers don't read the signs. They're following a GPS, and they think that the signs don't apply to them. It's an amazing thing. I mean, when the cops interview them,
have you come up with any?
I think the only
mechanism?
answer, I think the only mechanism is to put a barrier across. You know, like when you go into a parking garage, you drive in with an SUV or something, and hanging down in front of you is a rubber bar, and it's attached to some kind of a post, and that tells you the height is here. If your vehicle doesn't go under that rubber bar, then you know what? You shouldn't be going in here because you're going to get stuck. And that's the kind of thing that we should be hanging on some of our parkways, and that's what Boston does. They have them all over the place. And now they still have trucks going on the parkways in Boston, but far fewer than they did before they put this into effect.
All right. Now, this is, I can't believe this. I read things about this, so you'll have to clarify this. You've called for the cancellation of cashless tolling contract with Conduit.
Yes.
Conduit is what, the company?
Conduit is an outside company. It's one of the largest in the country to provide this cashless tolling service. Now, when you go across the Tappan Zee Bridge, now known as the Cuomo Bridge, you will see there are no toll takers. Now, when it was the Tappan Zee Bridge, we had toll takers, and things seemed to be working pretty well. The governor decided that he wanted to do away with toll takers. He wanted to make it totally cashless. And frankly, since it's been the Cuomo Bridge, since it's been cashless, there's been chaos. And the reason there's been chaos is because the company that takes the pictures and matches them up with computers and then sends out the bills, and I should be fair, there's several companies involved in this, but the main one is Conduit, and it's a nationwide company. And frankly, they've screwed up. People have not been getting the bills. People have had their registration suspended. They've been pulled out of their cars by state police, and they've been sent to court. And you know, people say, "Wait a minute, I never got the bill. What are we talking about?" Or I was negotiating with Conduit. How come I said I would pay you if it was a fair fee? I mean, because the system is the first bill is, let's say, $5. The second bill is $10. Then it becomes $110 or $105. Then it becomes $600. And so people are looking at this and say, wait, I didn't get the first one, or I didn't see the first one. What's happening here? How do I solve this problem? And so we believe that and I say we, there's several of us who have called for Conduit's contract to be canceled. And then if they want to renegotiate it, but the way it's going, it just isn't working properly. They're the company that had a problem in Florida. Florida's system was down for 60 days recently. It just went back online. They've had a problem in Texas. They had a problem in California. So what kind of due diligence was done by the Thruway Authority before they went to this company? And what kind of penalties are they putting in for failing? We asked for a copy of the contract. We got a 150-page contract with 50 pages blanked out. All of the important stuff. So much for transparency, but that's why we're doing this. We think this is a real problem, and it's got to be solved. The governor wants to go statewide with his cashless tolling. Before you do that, you've got to solve the problem.
But people were really pulled out of their car, and I heard they pulled their luggage out and just left them on the
side of the road.
The state police have that power just because
what they're doing
is
saying they're saying see this, unlike any other collection agency, what happens here is they send it to the motor vehicle department, and they say suspend them because they failed to pay a ticket. And if they didn't pay what they were supposed to pay, okay, so now their registration's suspended. That's a terrible plan, a terrible plan. I know the governor proposed this. I think he snuck this into one of the budgets. I know I spoke against it, but I can't vote against the budget. But again, the power of the governor to set the framework of the budget, to put this in so that they had the authority to suspend registrations. And once you're driving a car with a suspended registration, whether you know it or not, you're violating the law, and the police can take the vehicle and take it off the road till the registration is properly re-registered. So that's the problem we have. I think it's an abuse of the power of the state police. I think it's an abuse of the power of the state. But we have not been able to get through to the governor on this issue.
Okay, now, I understand You've had we've had the good fortune. You worked to get some state grants for local libraries. You want to tell us?
Yeah, I was the library chair for a couple of years, and we were woefully underfunding libraries. So I was fortunate to get the backing of the speaker, and we raised the budget, the operating budget, some $5 million. They don't get a lot of money in operating. I think it was up to like $95 million, which is a pittance compared to the number of libraries in the state. And we raised the capital funding. I think it was like $10 million. Unfortunately, this last year, the governor went back to the numbers they were before I was library chair, which was 4 years ago. And so we had to fight all over again. But the Assembly pushed really hard, the Senate pushed really hard, and we got some really good numbers for the libraries this year. And so there's money flowing out there for our libraries.
Yeah.
And our libraries are community centers. They're the modern-day community center. The kids are there, the little kids are there, the grandparents are there. It's a great place, and if you go into any one of our libraries, you see they're doing great things. There are computers available to the public, and libraries are a really important part of our community.
That's for Greenburgh, Tarrytown, Hastings.
Yes, I've been able to get money here, but all over the state, because
Right.
the legislature pushed really hard back against the governor's proposed cuts, and saying, no, libraries are vital, especially for poor people and people in lower middle income positions. Not everybody has a fancy computer at home. Not everybody's got a system that works real well. It's important for kids. And then the socialization process, the programs that they run. There are parts of the state where libraries are the last resort in a storm.
All right, let me
the
just
only place
move
that has
on,
electricity.
because I want to get a couple of these topics, and they're very important. What is your position on the legalization of marijuana for recreational use and for medical patients?
I'm in favor of both. I
Okay.
believe that we should be. The Assembly passed the legislation, which the governor didn't like. It had to be cut back, which would allow the doctor's discretion. Let the doctor determine if a particular patient can benefit from medical marijuana. I have a bill right now to try to get marijuana available for kids with autism, because the side effects of the drugs that people use are horrendous. And we don't want to get people hooked on drugs. We've got enough problems with people hooked on drugs. Marijuana I have to admit, like Cynthia Nixon did, I've only used it once. And it didn't do anything for me, okay? But I hear from people that it's a miracle drug, depending on what your condition is. As far as the using it for recreation, I don't have an objection to that. I mean, look, I think there are ways of dealing with the problems that you'll have people driving while they're high, okay? So we got to deal with that. We got to develop the equipment so that you can determine if somebody's driving while intoxicated, in effect. So you have that problem with alcohol, so we'll deal with that problem. I think right now the criminal justice system is not working properly because too many people, particularly minority members of the minority community, too many people are getting arrested for these minor little incidents dealing with marijuana. So it's by and large pretty much legal recreationally for white people in the upper middle class, and it's the poorer people, it's people, minorities who are getting harassed by the police. I think this is a criminal justice issue. I think we should make it legal and be done with it.
All right, just a yes or no answer, because I want to ask you a couple other things.
Sure.
If Roe versus Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court, would you sponsor or support legislation that protects a woman's reproductive rights in New York State?
The answer is yes. We in the Assembly have voted for a bill over and over and over again that would make Roe versus Wade the law in New York State. Today, abortion is controlled by the penal law, not by the health law. It should be in the health law. It should not be in the penal law. We've passed it in the Assembly. I wouldn't wait for it to be overturned. I think we should just do it, solve the problem, and let's move on.
Again, brief. The other thing that's been in the news, of course, do you support legislation calls for the abolishment of ICE?
I do, and I believe that ICE serves a valid function, but it should not be operating the way it operates. And sometimes you get an entity that's so far gone that you need to replace it. Some people are saying reform it, do this, that, and the other thing. My feeling is just start all over again. Take those functions that are valid functions, either give them to a different agency or set up another agency to do those. Look, I'm very concerned about the way Donald Trump is acting these days. You know, I know this is scaring people to hear this kind of rhetoric, but if you look at the way he's operating, he is operating as a dictator. And if you take a look at what Adolf Hitler did not come into power by overcoming everybody. He was appointed to a position in government. And little by little, he had his own troops, his own stormtroopers out on the street so that he could do what he wanted to do outside of the normal police departments that were controlled by others. ICE is in the total control of the president. That really troubles me. There is no control over that agency by anybody else. And I think that is wrong. I think we should have an agency that is controlled by Congress, not by the president. And so I would do away with ICE. I don't want it to become his private police department. I don't want it to do the things that he wants it to do. That's why I would do away with ICE.
All right, gun purchases. Did we talk about that?
No, not yet.
All right, do you favor legislation that would require mental health checks?
Yes, I've put legislation in. I put it in this year. Everybody's talking about, how mental health issues, not guns, are the problem. Okay, well, I'm going to force them to either put up or shut up. Let's make sure that every person who wants to go buy any kind of a gun has to show that they have been examined by a mental health professional within, I don't know, pick a period, last 6 months, last 3 months, whatever, so that they can present that and say, I am okay, I don't have any mental health issues, therefore I should be able to get the gun. Background checks are really important. We're not doing those thoroughly enough. The Assembly has passed a bill that would allow longer time for background checks. Right now it's 3 days, and if they don't get a negative, then the person gets to buy the gun. What's so wrong with waiting 10 days? The FBI will say they need 10 days to do the proper background checks. And so let's give them 10 days. That's another piece of this. We've got to look and say guns are dangerous instruments. They're not toys. Let's stop treating them like toys. We've got to treat them like as the dangerous instruments that they are. Mental health checks and better background checks are necessary.
Do you support legislation that safeguards employees from sexual harassment in the workplace, and not just women, but men too?
Oh, I agree. Yes, as a matter of fact, at the end of session, we discovered a loophole in the law. The budget included some mandates for all employers to set up within their own businesses a procedure to deal with sexual harassment and other types of harassment. But we realized that there is no protection in the law for someone who's a whistleblower. A person can be fired for any reason as long as it's not one of the prohibited reasons. And a whistleblower is not, firing a whistleblower is not a prohibited reason for firing them. So I have drafted legislation. I introduced it at the end of the last session, so we really didn't have a chance to deal with it. I'm going to move forward with that in January. Legislation that would make it illegal to fire a whistleblower because they're a whistleblower. And I think sexual harassment is one of those situations. There are other discriminations that would also be included in that.
Last year, you had sponsored a property tax relief bill that would let communities in your district impose a 3% hotel room tax. What's the status on that?
It works very well. Greenberg's anticipating bringing in $1 million in non-property tax revenue. It's I think it sets a model for us. We can't just tell local governments that you have a property tax cap, because sometimes they need to have the money to run government properly. If you take a look, our roads are a mess because they don't have enough money to pave the roads and to build new sidewalks and whatever. So we've got to find other sources of revenue which are not property tax revenues.
Tom, we've run out of time. We've got to have you back. But thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
To my viewers, if you missed any parts of this program, you can go to our website, thedennisrudenshow.com. My guest has been Tom Abinanti, Assemblyman. This is Dennis Rudin saying so long for Profiles and Issues.